When we get periods of dry weather, we are getting more periods of really quite sustained dry weather. So planting drought-tolerant plants in the garden is a really helpful way of making your garden more resilient when we get periods like that. There are some crucial ways of recognising drought-tolerant plants. They often have really small leaves, reduced foliage, maybe a waxy layer on the outside of the leaves. The leaves tend to be lighter or silver in colour, maybe a bit dusty, and often they have very fine hairs on the surface of the leaves as well. If you see any of those signs, chances are you're looking at a plant that can cope with long periods of drought. But remember that when you plant it, you will still need to water it until it's established. No plant is drought tolerant from the word go. So get it nice and established, and then you should be able to leave it to take care of itself. One really great drought-tolerant plant is Erigeron carvinskianus. It's Mexican flea bane, and it's a tiny daisy plant. It has sort of pink petals that open up to white, and you tend to see it growing in the most unexpected places, so in little cracks between concrete and a wall, or even growing up the wall. And that's a really good clue that it can cope with drought, because the roots have got hardly any soil, hardly any space, and they'll be getting hardly any moisture where they're growing. So they're really fantastic for slowly spreading and taking over an area where very little else will grow. So if you have a wall or a raised bed or a little crack in some paving and you want to bring some colour, then Mexican flea bane is a really good plant for doing that. Nepeta is another very, very good drought-tolerant plant. It's called catmint, but it's not the true catmint, so it doesn't really have much of a use, but it does have a lovely smell. So when you rub the foliage, it gives off these volatile oils that smell lovely. That's another hint that it's drought-tolerant. So any plant that when you rub it has a scent, it probably is very good at coping with drought. Lots and lots of herbs have that same characteristic. But Nepeta has lovely ornamental spikes of blue flowers. And the great thing about it is that you can cut it back a few times during the year, and the whole plant will then form another mound and often flower again. So it's a really useful plant in the garden. Santolina is a really lovely plant. It's called cotton lavender, that's the common name. And rather than the purple flowers of true lavender, it's got little pom-poms of yellow flowers that form on mounds of really ornate silver foliage. It's a really good performer in a very dry position. It won't like to be anywhere that gets wet in the winter. So if you have a really sandy or rubbly area of the garden that's baked by the sun, Santolina will be really happy there, and it will perform really well. The more stressed these plants are, often the stronger the scents when you rub the foliage, and often the more it will flower as well. So it's a really lovely plant. You can keep it in shape by just clipping it once a year and making it form those mounds again so it doesn't get too leggy, and then it will live for a bit longer. It's not a hugely long-lived perennial, but you'll get 6, 7, 8 years out of it if you regularly prune it. It's a really lovely plant. Sedum is a genus of plants that is very wide-ranging, and they all show something called succulence, which is when the actual flesh of the plant has altered itself to store water, a little bit like a cactus. But sedum are really good performers. They're very varied, and often they grow in places like along the coast in shingle, or up a mountain. You'll see them often called stone crops running along the ground. You can get more ornate ones as well, which get taller, and they have really good flowers for pollinators. Lots and lots of them will flower and are really enriching to biodiversity and to the insects that visit your garden. But the great thing about them is, with that succulence and the ability to flower, they have versatility as a garden plant. So somewhere like this, where you have a nice rubbly ground, you could have sedum running along the surface of it. Or if you had a taller one, it could be in amongst your herbaceous perennials. And they are so drought tolerant because of that ability to hold onto the water within their own cells. If you have an area of your garden that is always dry, maybe a rain shadow against a wall, then you can plant a drought-tolerant tree. And one of the best drought-tolerant trees are olive trees. They can be pretty pricey if you get a lovely big specimen one, but I think they're worth it for the gorgeous big chunky stems and then the silvery foliage. They can be a little bit tolerant to frost, so if you're in a very cold area you may not want to invest in something like that, and you have to always make sure you buy them from a really reputable source, because they need plant passports so that they're not carrying something called Xylella virus, which is coming from the Mediterranean. So a good well-sourced tree is worth the investment because they're so majestic, they're so beautiful, and then if you're very lucky and very sheltered, you may even get some olive fruits that you can cure and store and eat. If you liked this video, then don't forget to click like and subscribe so that you can get lots more tips from me and other familiar faces on the Gardener's World magazine YouTube channel.